Welcome to Control-Alt-Society podcast. Today we are stepping out of the chaos of the main terminal and attempting to gain entry into the most contested square footage in modern travel. We are dissecting a deeply insightful piece from The New Yorker titled "The Frontier of the Airport Lounge Wars."
And war is not a metaphor the author uses lightly. I mean, we're talking about a fundamental shift in the architecture of travel. We've gone from these quiet, smoky, exclusive sanctuaries of the 90s to a modern landscape defined by velvet ropes, biometric scanners, and a level of aggression that feels less like hospitality and more like a tactical skirmish.
It is a dramatic transformation, certainly. The premise established by the source material is that the airport lounge has shifted from a mere amenity, a place to grab a drink, to a zone of intense conflict. The author identifies this as a frontier, a place where the rules are being rewritten in real time. But the central question we need to wrestle with today is, well, how do we interpret this conflict? Does this lounge war represent a necessary evolution of premium travel services, a messy but vital correction that ultimately benefits the market? Or does it signal a broken system characterized by artificial scarcity and, frankly, consumer exploitation?
I'm going to be very clear about where I stand on this. I look at this war and I see a classic bait and switch. I view the conflict as one being fought largely against the passenger, utilizing exclusionary tactics rather than genuine service. It feels like a race to the bottom in terms of accessibility, disguised as a race to the top in luxury.
And I am going to push back on that immediately. I view the lounge wars as a driver of innovation. This frontier, the article describes, is not a wasteland. It is a space of rapid development where high-stakes competition is forcing airlines and credit card issuers to finally upgrade a stagnant product. It's a necessary correction to preserve the value of premium travel. If you look at the economics, this war is the only thing saving the lounge from becoming a cafeteria.
Saving it or turning it into a fortress? But let's back up and look at the terrain. The article describes this frontier as a place of friction.
But friction is often the precursor to progress. The New Yorker article uses the specific terminology, the frontier. To me, a frontier suggests a new horizon of quality. It suggests that we are pushing the boundaries of what is possible within an airport terminal. When I read about the war, I see it as a battle between giants. Delta, United, American, Chase, Amex, all fighting for the loyalty of the high-value customer.
But let's look at why they are fighting. This isn't just about selling plane tickets anymore. The article makes it very clear that the airlines have effectively morphed into banks. They're selling credit cards first and seats second. This war is a direct result of them flooding the zone with credit card offers that promised lounge access to everyone with a decent credit score.
That is the context. Yes, the loyalty programs became the primary revenue engine.
Exactly. So they created this massive wave of people, millions of them, who were sold a promise. Get the card, get the lounge. That was the deal. And now that those millions of people are actually showing up at the airport, expecting the quiet sanctuary they paid for, the airlines are panicking. They oversold the inventory. So when you talk about innovation, I see damage control. I see them frantically trying to build barriers to keep out the very people they courted.
You're describing the mechanism of induced demand, which the article touches on, but you're framing it as a conspiracy rather than a market cycle. Yes, access was broadened. Too broadly, I would argue, and the result was that the product, the lounge experience, degraded. You cannot have a luxury experience that is available to everyone. That is, by definition, an oxymoron.
It wasn't available to everyone. It was available to people paying $500 or $600 a year in annual fees.
Which in the context of global travel infrastructure is a mass market price point. That's the hard truth. The war we are seeing now is the market correcting that imbalance. In business, wars usually result in a superior product for the victor. And in this case, the victor is the traveler who is truly willing to pay for excellence, not just the one who signed up for a mid-tier card. The article details the escalation: better food, chef-curated menus, designer interiors, spa services. This competition forces them to upgrade. If there was no war, if there was no competition, we would still be sitting in windowless rooms eating stale cheese cubes. The friction is producing heat, and that heat is forging a better experience.
I dispute that the heat is forging a better experience for the majority. I come at it from a completely different way. You're describing a frontier of innovation. I see a frontier in the old, lawless sense, a place where the previous social contracts are being broken. The article highlights that this war is characterized by overcrowding, lines snaking out the door, and aggressive restrictions. The innovation isn't the food, the innovation is the lounge full sign.
You are focusing on the transition costs.
I'm focusing on the reality of the user experience. The article describes people waiting in line for 40 minutes just to put their name on a list. That is not a premium experience. That is the DMV with better lighting. The frontier here isn't about better food. It's about shifting the goalposts so that the product people paid for is suddenly out of reach.
Well, that brings us directly to our first core point is debate. The definition of this frontier. Is it defined by innovation, as I suggest, or restriction, as you claim?
The evidence in the text points almost exclusively to restriction being the primary tool. The article describes the modern lounge experience not by the comfort inside, but by the barrier outside. We are seeing the deployment of what I would call exclusion technology.
Elaborate on that.
Well, the article mentions the sophisticated ways they're policing entry, biometrics, strict boarding pass scans that reject you if you're 3 hours and 1 minute early for your flight, algorithms that check your spend tier in real time. The innovation dollars aren't going into the cheese cubes, they're going into the digital bouncer at the door. They are innovating new ways to say no.
A lounge is defined by who is not there.
That is a very convenient definition for the airline, isn't it?
It is the only definition that works. Look at the specific examples of the new flagship lounges mentioned in the piece. The Delta One lounges, the new Centurion spaces. These are architectural marvels. We're seeing outdoor terraces, full-service dining, showers, sleep pods. The escalation of amenities implies that to win the war, providers must offer more than just a seat. They must offer an experience. The frontier is where the airport terminal stops being a holding pen and starts being a hospitality venue. But that is physically impossible if you let every credit card holder inside.
So the strategy is to promise the world to sell the card, and then build a fortress to keep the cardholders out.
The strategy is to tier the access. Exclusivity is a component of comfort. You cannot have a relaxing environment if it is overcrowded. The article makes it clear that the popularity of these spaces was destroying them. So, the innovation of restriction is actually a pro-consumer move for the people inside. It is preserving the utility of the lounge. If you let everyone in, you're effectively letting no one in, because the service collapses. The frontier is the line where we decide that quality matters more than quantity.
That brings us to the casualties of this war. And this is my second major concern. The source material, by framing this as a war, implies there are winners and losers. And the losers here are the displaced travelers.
Define displaced.
I'm talking about the mid-tier traveler, the business traveler who flies domestic, maybe an economy or economy plus, but who carries the premium card, the person who plays by the rules. The article suggests these people are being caught in the crossfire. They're being pushed out of spaces they arguably paid for via credit card fees. They arrive at the frontier only to find the border closed, or that the rules have changed overnight. No entry on arrival, no entry 3 hours before.
I see why you characterize them as victims, but I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it ignores the concept of the tragedy of the commons. This is a classic economic problem.
It's a problem of corporate greed, not grazing cattle.
The principle is identical. The commons here is the lounge capacity. Each individual traveler acting in their own self-interest, getting the card, going to the lounge, depletes the resource for everyone else. The article reveals that the ecosystem was breaking under the weight of its own accessibility. When you have lines extending into the terminal, the value of the lounge drops to zero.
But the airline sold tickets to the commons. They sold the grazing rights.
They sold a chance at the commons, subject to capacity. That has always been in the fine print, and the market is correcting. I acknowledge the displacement is painful. It's never fun to be told you're no longer elite enough.
but it is necessary for the ecosystem to survive. If everyone wins, no one wins. The war is correcting a market failure where the product, peace and quiet, was destroyed by its own popularity. The advocate for the consumer must realize that the consumer needs protection from the crowd, even if the crowd is other consumers.
That is a very cold corporate calculus. You're essentially saying that the war is a mechanism to shed deadweight. But these are human beings who have planned their travel around these amenities. The article touches on the psychology of this, the rejection at the desk. It creates a hostile environment. Can an exclusive space exist without being hostile?
Hostility is a strong word.
Is it? The article describes lounge agents acting more like bouncers at a nightclub. The current iteration of the lounge war seems to rely on hostility, long lines, confusing rules, public rejection to manage the crowd. That is not hospitality. That is processing. It's churn.
It is friction, and friction is the price of high demand. But look at what is happening on the other side of that friction. The travelers who do make the cut, the ones flying business class internationally, the ones with the highest status, the whales as the industry calls them, are finding a better sanctuary. The war is clearing the brush. You call it hostility, I call it filtering. And the result of that filtering is that the lounge can return to its original purpose, a refuge.
A refuge for the 1%?
A refuge for the most loyal and profitable customers. Business is about prioritizing your best customers. The article highlights that airlines and banks are finally recognizing that they cannot serve two masters. They cannot serve the mass market and the premium market in the same physical space.
I think the article highlights that they created this mess by trying to monetize the mass market while promising them the premium experience. They wanted the revenue from the masses, but the exclusivity of the elite. And now that the math doesn't work, they're defaulting on the mass market. It's a rug pull.
Which leads us to the end game. Where does this go? The source material hints at a future state for this frontier.
It does. And this is where I get really skeptical about your optimism.
I see a stabilization. I suggest the end game of this conflict is a tiered system that restores order. We are already seeing it in the article, the rise of business class only lounges versus credit card lounges versus priority pass lounges. The war will settle into a stable hierarchy of ultra premium versus standard. It's efficient. It clarifies the market. You get exactly what you pay for.
You see stability. I see a perpetual arms race. The article describes a dynamic where as soon as a new standard is set, it becomes obsolete. I suggest the end game is a cycle of fees and hurdles that alienates the customer base.
How so?
Because the frontier keeps moving. That's the nature of a frontier. Once you civilize one area, the exclusive value moves further out. The article implies that today's exclusive lounge is tomorrow's overcrowding crisis. If the end game is just pay more to get away from the people who paid slightly less, then the goalpost will just keep moving to ensure dissatisfaction.
That's the nature of luxury goods.
It's the nature of a Veblen good, where demand increases as price increases because of status. But we're talking about infrastructure. The article points out that these lounges are often the only places in an airport to get decent food or a quiet chair. By turning that into a status game, you are creating a dystopian stratification. The end game looks like a world where your physical comfort is microtransacted down to the minute. Want to sit? That's $50. Want to sit in silence? That's $100.
I think that is overly cynical. The airport has always been stratified. First class, coach. The lounge is just the physical manifestation of that ticket. The war is simply clarifying lines that got blurry during the era of easy credit.
But consider the induced demand point again. The article suggests that by building these massive, luxurious new lounges, the airlines are actually creating more demand for them, which leads to more crowding, which leads to more restrictions. It's a feedback loop. They build a terrace, everyone wants to see the terrace gets full, they build a VIP terrace. When does it stop?
It stops when the price equilibrium is met. But another way to view it is that the goalposts move toward better. The competition drives the baseline up. Even the standard lounges today, the ones you say are being neglected, are often better than the premium lounges of 20 years ago in terms of connectivity and food quality.
The war raises the floor, not just the ceiling.
Does it? Or does it just make the floor more crowded? The article describes people sitting on floors near power outlets in so-called clubs. That doesn't feel like the floor has been raised. It feels like the infrastructure has collapsed.
That is the transitional pain. That is the fog of war. But the companies that win this war, the ones the article focuses on, are the ones solving that problem by building massive cathedral-like spaces. They are building their way out of the scarcity. The end game is abundance, but only for those who invest in the relationship with the airline.
Invest in the relationship. That's a very polite way of saying spend an exorbitant amount of money.
Which is how premium services work. You don't walk into a 5-star hotel and complain that the lobby is nicer than the Motel 6.
But we are talking about airports, public infrastructure. The article raises this tension. These are spaces we are forced to be in. We're held captive by the TSA and flight schedules. The lounge war is essentially leveraging that captivity to extract maximum value.
The airport terminal is public, the lounge is private property leased within it.
And the war is about the encroachment of that private stratification into every aspect of the travel experience.
Let's bring this to a close, though. I suspect the lines at the Delta Sky Club are still getting longer as we speak.
Unfortunately, I think you're right about that. And I think the people in those lines are starting to realize they are their product, not the customer.
To summarize my position, I read The Frontier of the Airport Lounge Wars, and I see a system in the midst of a high-stakes evolution. Yes, it's chaotic. Yes, there is displacement. But competition is the primary engine for improving the high-end travel experience. The war is forcing providers to innovate, to build better spaces, and to protect the value of the product for their core customers. It is a necessary struggle to save the concept of the lounge from mediocrity.
And I look at the same material and see a disconnect. The conflict reveals a fundamental break between travel infrastructure and passenger needs. We have turned a hospitality product into a status battleground. The war is being fought with exclusion and artificial scarcity, and the result is a cycle of induced demand and disappointment. The frontier isn't a place of opportunity. It's a place where the consumer is constantly being told they aren't quite good enough to sit down.
We're left with that term frontier. It can be a place of opportunity or a place of conflict. Usually, history tells us it is both.
And usually, it's the people living on the frontier, the travelers, who bear the brunt of it while the generals and headquarters count the money.
I think we can agree on one thing. As long as the airport experience outside the lounge remains difficult, loud, crowded, uncomfortable, the war for the sanctuary inside will continue.
Absolutely. If the terminal wasn't so hostile, the lounge wouldn't be so critical. That's the real tragedy.
A valid point. We will not declare a winner today. We'll leave that to the gate agents. Next time you travel, take a look at the line or the lack thereof and decide for yourself who is winning the war.
And good luck finding a seat.